Hello, everyone, and welcome to Security for Tax Professionals, understanding your obligations and adopting appropriate policies. This webcast is brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor Magazine and Drake Software. I'm Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to explain how continuing education for this webcast works. The webcast qualifies for 1 credit of continuing professional education. Also, if you need it, this event qualifies for 1 IRS CE credit. If you plan to earn credit for attending this session, you must stay with us for at least 50 minutes. In addition, we will display 4 polling questions during the webcast. You'll need to record an answer for at least 3 of the questions, as this is our verification that you are still watching. Later today, you'll receive an email from CPA Practice Advisor that contains a link to your CPE certificate, assuming you met the requirements for CPE. If you're needing IRS CE credit, you should have entered your PTIN number when you registered for this event. If you did not, you can go ahead and enter it in the Ask a Question box on your screen, along with the exact name that you used for IRS registration, and we'll record it there. Please note that we can give continuing education credit for multiple people watching on the same computer. So if there are others in your office who would like to attend this event at the same computer, please have them join you now. And at the end of the event, we'll provide an opportunity for you to send us their email addresses so they too can receive credit. At any time, you can enter any questions you might have in the Ask a Question box on your screen, and our speaker will try to get to as many questions as possible during the presentation. Questions not answered during this live webinar will be addressed by the speaker afterwards via email. While the slides for this event are not available for download, the archived version of this presentation will appear on the CPA Practice Advisor website after the event ends. CPE credit will not be available for watching the archived version. Today, we're joined by Ballew, Vice President of Government Relations for Taxwell, representing both Drake Software and Tax Act products. And now, Jared, we're ready to begin.
Awesome. Thank you, Gail. And I'm really glad to be here today. And I know you're all very excited, as I can see, about talking about cybersecurity as a tax professional. And one of the things I like to tell people is just, let's take a breath, right? And just say, I'm a tax professional. I know that's what I do, but I can do this. And today, hopefully, as I speak, you'll get some tips and some tricks on how you can practically apply some really good techniques to protect not only yourself and your business and reputation, but also your taxpayers and their information. And so today, what I really want to cover is some of the objectives and the things that I want to walk through. I always tell people that, you really don't appreciate the complexity that tax professionals have to walk is whenever you think about all the different rules and tax law changes. And then we throw cybersecurity on there, it kind of starts to drive you a little bit crazy, right? One more thing that you have to do. And I don't know about you, but I don't need one more thing to drive me crazy. I'm close enough to walk, right? At this point. So again, today I'm going to try not to push you any further down that crazy lane. But what we do want to talk about today is learning ways we combat it and ways that are practical for a tax professional. One of the things that I do want to talk about, though, is what does our landscape look like? In the news, many of us go out daily and we see a breach over here with a financial institution. We see our favorite store's been breached. We see government agencies have been breached. And to us, we look back at our practice and say, I'm just a small guy. Like, what can I do? How can I effectively fend off these bad actors that are coming after me and wanting my taxpayer data? What can I actually do to make a difference? And to that, I would say, look to the left and right. You don't have to be the best of the best in the industry. You don't have to be the most secure. You don't have to have the highest level of security close to Fort Knox. But you do need to have some common sense steps in place and practices in place that can help prevent from bad things happening to you, right? And it's becoming aware. And I tell a lot of people when I'm talking about a tax practice in particular, when we start advising our customers about what they need to be collecting for us to be able to properly do financial planning or projections or even filing their tax return, we have some things to look out for, right, when we're advising our customers. And today, I'm going to try and give you that same advice. These are some things to look out for, which will make you be aware of your cybersecurity health or situations, just as your customers want to have their financial situations looked out. So at Drake Software, we did a poll, which is really interesting, and I'll start here. Through the pandemic, it really fundamentally changed how we interact with taxpayers. The days of people coming to your office and having brick and mortar, and the majority of your customers coming and handing you that packet, those are starting to change, and we've seen that, and the pandemic kind of just pushed us over the edge here. One of the questions we asked was, how are you actually exchanging the documents and the packet and the information that you're getting from your customers every year? And some really positive news, this isn't all down, is that a lot of practitioners have moved to a secure portal. What that means is that they've purchased a system, whether it be with, like Drake Software has our portal system, right, where you can transact and send files back and forth from a customer, letters, signature documents. But they've moved away from the traditional method of an email. And as we all know, email is one of the least secure methods that you can transfer information back and forth from one of your customers. But in 2002, we saw about 39% of people there. Email was still used about 28%. But over this past year, we saw a nice little uptick. We saw a little drop in email where people actually pushed more from mail delivery or physical drop-off. That was the biggest change we saw over this past year. And they started moving to the more digital transaction of using a portal system while not implementing email in that process. So that was a big kudos that I will say to tax pros, and something that's really heartening to see that people are paying attention about their cyber hygiene. Another interesting metric that we started collecting was communication, right? So not so much about sending that personal identifiable information, but rather how do we call, contact, communicate, ask questions, and kind of have that normal back and forth relationship? How do we know our customers? And in 2002, we saw a couple of interesting things here. One being that email was the primary medium for communication, even if it wasn't for transferring data. But we still saw a really heavy reliance here on the phone, right? So you were still calling your customer, you were talking over the phone. What's interesting is when we go to this next year, you'll look, that dropped considerably. People stopped using the phone to call their customers, and they started picking up some other mediums. So while still relying heavily on email, we saw people starting to use things like portal messaging. That was non-existent just 1 year ago, but we just see a 9% increase. So that's really exciting to hear, text messaging. And we understand that sometimes you don't necessarily dictate that communication mechanism. I know I've got customers that love to just send me text messages. They'll send me copies of their tax return or their W-2 rather, or Social Security card. Sometimes you can't avoid how they're sending you stuff. And today, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, what do you do when things are outside of your control? Whenever you didn't initiate the communication, but they sent you these documents anyway. How do we protect that? What are we going to do to kind of put some practices in place to make sure we're keeping things safe and secure? What's the landscape for you as a tax practitioner? So one of the things that we're seeing, I guess in this past year, one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that the refundable credits, right? Anytime that Congress is out there legislating and saying, hey, we're going to give you more refunds, and it's based off of your tax return, or it's reconciled through your tax return, it's really putting that pressure upon you guys to then become the gatekeepers for the IRS to say, does this person qualify? And then protecting the information and making sure they're not trying to lie to you. And then the bad guys know that if they can breach your systems, well, then they have access to hundreds of tax returns at which they could then claim these refundable credits. The other threat that we're seeing, obviously, is remote preparation. You implementing technology in your office where it allows people access, right? Whether you intend for them to work remotely during the day, are you shutting things off at night? And so really understanding, when we as practitioners have tools, right? And we want to be mobile, we want to be able to work from home, work from the office. When we put a tool in place, we have to really understand how it's connected and what are the permission levels that are connected to that piece. One of the things that I have also seen is ransomware. It's been on the rise. Ransomware just basically means that that the bad guys get into your system, but when they get in, they lock you out. And they basically say, you got to pay a ransom for us to unlock your computer. And as you probably know, ransomware and bad guys, there's no honor among thieves. Even if you pay them, it doesn't mean that they haven't made a copy, shipped it off, and they're using it for whatever they want elsewhere. But what we've seen is a concerted effort in the tax prep space where they're actually looking up your local area, they're finding out who you are, and they're actually threatening local news agencies and your actual customers to say, we will notify the local agency that you're under a ransomware attack. And they'll threaten to disgrace your name and discredit your name locally unless you pay. So they've gotten pretty sharp when we start talking about the tax software offices and ransomware attacks together. So those are some of the landscapes that we're seeing as far as threats to you guys as a practitioner. But it's not all lost. There are some ways that we can protect it. Now, we've got this next slide, and some big words, some difficult words here. One of the things that I like to do is I like to break it down into two segments, right? What are my responsibilities as far as security, and who am I responsible to, right? So on the left-hand side, we have the FTC, and we're going to go into more about who they are and why they're responsible. But the FTC is responsible for protecting and safeguarding taxpayer data because you are a financial institution. So we have the government agency you're responsible to, right? That's your kind of your oversight for securing data. But on the right-hand side, it's called a CIA triad, and that is you're responsible to your customers, your taxpayers, right? What do they expect from you? They're expecting confidentiality, right? They're expecting integrity, but there's that third one in there, they're expecting availability, right? And so they want to be able to have access to you and their data, and they're always kind of pushing that boundary of what's acceptable because believe it or not, taxpayers sometimes don't really care about their security and their privacy of data. And so you have to be that authoritative source to say, look, this is the secure way to do it. You need to follow this method, and not being bent to a taxpayer's demands of, well, I can just go over here and do this. Why not accept it this way? And so, those are kind of your two bosses. One is the regulatory oversight people, and what do they say? And then what are your customers saying, and how do you kind of put those two together? And that's really where we're going to go today. So first, let's talk about your regulatory and your oversight body and what they say about security. And it's really, like I said, broke down into three main areas, which is physical security, technical, and administrative. And so when we start to put a plan together as a tax pro, right, let's just put this down on a piece of paper, right? Because we need to start documenting these three areas of security that we are putting in place to protect ourselves and our taxpayers. So you want to write this down. You want to write down what's my physical security, what's my technical, what's my administrative. Let's jump right into the physical. So as I begin to develop a plan, as I begin to figure out how I'm going to get that I've got written down right now, all I have to do is I just need to walk into my office. Let's pretend like we're going to do a walkthrough, or you're doing an open house as a realtor, right? So I come to the front door of my office. If that's your home, if it's an office in your home, if it's a building you rent or you share, is there a door? Great. Someone physically coming into my office and stealing something. There's a lock on the door that is a barrier to access to my data. So how could someone physically steal data? That's one. I actually have some friends that live down in Texas, and they said, well, I have a Rottweiler. Is that a good security mechanism I can put down? And I said, well, if you think that they'll protect your data at all costs, yeah, go ahead and write that one down. I kid, but we want to think about what are we protecting physically. One of those things that you can do is have locks on. And we can also talk about how we handle our data, right? So think about when a document physically comes in, is it being scanned in and it's digitally secured and destroyed? Are things left on my desk? How am I protecting someone from looking over my shoulder on my screen? So I just want to talk about and write down, how am I physically protecting the things that come into my office, or from an intruder walking in, or from fire? Right? You could have a disaster or a flood, no different. You want to make sure you document those physical things. So it's really simple. If you documented the physical protections you put in place, you're 1/3 of the way done. Another thing that you can document, we're going to get into the next part, is technical. There are things called encrypting your hard drive. Microsoft Professional has a free version called BitLocker that you can just turn on your computer, and it will encrypt your hard drive at rest, meaning that when it's powered off, it locks all the documents. When you power it on and you log in, it unlocks all the documents. Now, it doesn't protect it from certain cyber threats, or if someone gets into your machine while you're working on it, but it does protect it if someone comes into your office, grabs the machine, unplugs it, and runs away, right? That data is then locked and encrypted. So that's kind of a physical crossover into the technical safeguard. So something to think about, right? That protects against a physical threat from your data. Now let's talk about technical, and this is generally where, as tax pros, we're like, this is not my forte. I can't do this. And, I was actually walking, I was in an airport the other day, and I walked past this bookstore, and I saw this book on the shelf, and it super intrigued me. And it said, how to solve 50% of your cybersecurity problems. And so, obviously I walked over there, I looked at it, it was super good. And I figured, you know what, why not buy two? Okay, that's a joke. If you didn't catch it, we got to catch up to speed and pay attention a little bit more here. But what we want to do about the technical safeguards is let's start simple. We know that we need an antivirus, right? People always ask me, what's the best antivirus? Which one should I get? Well, there's a couple factors that I will tell you, but the biggest one that I will say is anything that's not free. Free simply means that they have the ability to use your information for their own gain, right? Basically, you are the product if it's free. The other thing about free is that they don't update their security definitions or their updates. So when there's a new virus that comes out, it could be a month before you get the protection from that virus on a free software. It could be up to that long. And so by paying for this service, you're guaranteed to get the latest and greatest as long as you set your updates to update regularly. So that's important. People also ask me about different variants. I would just say do a little research. There are some companies that aren't US based, and that's up to you. But ultimately, my biggest recommendation is just pay for a service, and you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of some that aren't. So that's kind of the general guard there. And then you have firewalls that you can put in place for your networking. Those generally come by default into the routers that you buy and you have for your office for wireless services or not. Those are some really good things that you can put in place. Some other really cheap tricks that you guys can look at is in your email. Some of you may use like a paid Gmail service. In there, you can actually turn off a feature that if it sees a 9-digit number that looks like a social, it'll actually prevent it from being sent out from your email inbox, right? So you can put some screening in. There's some really cool tips and tricks out there for technology, but ultimately, the biggest thing I can say is start with something small, like an antivirus, like a firewall, and go from there. Those are some really good things that you can put in place. Now, moving on, the third thing that I will say is you document what you put in place, write it down for your technical. Administrative, this is probably the most overlooked of all businesses. It doesn't have to be tax pros or particular to tax, is being able to train and educate. Many of us, maybe a small shop where we hire someone in that has access to the data, maybe their data entry, or they're part-time, or they're a front office assistant, or maybe it's family. Training people who have access to computers on your network is more important than any of the other three, or the other two, I should say, because 90% of the time when a breach occurs, it's because someone else did it and it wasn't you as the tax professional. And so when we think about that, bringing the awareness to our employees, bringing the awareness to those that are inside of our office of the sensitivity of the data and how people are going after you is very important. One of the other things that I will say when we talk about cybersecurity and kind of the technical side of it is, if you get nothing else from this entire session, absolutely nothing else, protecting your email is the number one thing that you should do. Being mindful and conscious of what comes into your email. And we're going to talk about some hygiene items here in just a second. But understanding that email is absolutely the number one thing that can compromise your data and how bad actors can get into your system. So before we jump into that cyber hygiene, we're going to jump to our first polling question.
Okay, everyone, this is the first polling question for this webinar. It is, does your organization provide training to help employees identify phishing emails and cyber threats? And your answer options are, yes, we have a comprehensive training program. We do have some training, but it's not consistent. No, but we plan to implement training soon. Or no, we do not currently offer this type of training. And if you have any difficulty answering the question on your screen, you can type your answer in that Ask a Question box and we'll record it there. But go ahead and place your answer and then click the Submit button. And we'll give this about another 10 seconds on the screen to make sure everybody gets a chance to answer it. But it looks like the way answers are coming in, about 25% are saying they don't have any type of training in place at this time.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to start. I mean, one of the things that I've heard as I go across, and I heard from actually a tax professional. I was in the IRS forum in Dallas, and she said, we have weekly meetings where we sit down and we talk about what did we see that came in an email? You know, did anything look off to you guys? And it's just having that open dialogue and that awareness. There are programs out there where you can do, as an office manager, where you can hire a company to penetration test. Basically, they'll send phishing emails to your office, and your employees could click on them or not, right? And then they'll send you a report back of who fell for the phishing email. And again, it really gives you that reassurance as a manager that your employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're listening. But if they do fail, it's a great education point. Like, what was interesting to you? Like, what made you, what tempted you? And one of the schemes that we're seeing here is the new client scheme, where a bad guy is pretending to be a new customer, and they're saying, "Hey, I looked you up on the web, on your website. Here's all my data and information. We set up a time to meet." And sometimes it's multiple emails they'll use, but they'll send that attachment. And that attachment is infected. And so I think that kind of brings me into the next part, which is a really good segue, is what is cyber hygiene? And we'll talk about how we can protect with like emails coming in and what you can do to set that up. Like I said before, breaches involving a human are about 74%, meaning that it's not like the bad guys are just out there sitting somewhere and getting in and finding you and getting in on their own. There's generally some element of a person, you or someone in your office or an individual that's clicking in. About 1 in 3 personal devices are actually infected with malware. That's another thing to think about, right? Is if you have a home office and you're letting your kids, grandkids, friends, anyone in the neighborhood come and get onto your network, their devices alone, if they're infected, getting onto your network can breach your system. And so having policies in place that basically say, this is my work network. If I'm using Wi-Fi, no one gets on it. No personal devices are allowed to connect to it. And then having that guest Wi-Fi network that's separate, just those little things that you can turn on are free to do, easy to do. And again, it's a protectant to just make sure that the unintentional side of it, the human element, is not actually increasing the chance of you being breached, right? Phishing is another thing. And I think I talked about this that the email is the number one thing that if you can lock down your email and protect your email, you've got most people beat on protecting your data. It takes 21 seconds really on average to click. And 28 to respond. So under 60 seconds from the time you click to the time the bad actor responds and can get a payload onto your system. Most of us can't react that fast or even know what happened. It's over 260 days on average before a person can recognize that a bad actor's been in their system. I don't know about you guys, but if I sat in one of my customers' offices for 263 days or 60-something days, and I watched how they ran their business, I had a pretty good idea where they were lacking. I might be able to improve on that shoebox customer that I have that brings me all those receipts. But same thing for these bad actors, right? They're very good, they're very clever, and how they can operate and take their time to see what data you have, and then generally offload that data somewhere else, and you never know it. So that's something that is really important. And again, ransomware is really where we're seeing things ramp up, where they're not just offloading your data. They're going to do that. They're going to use that and sell that and file tax returns. but they're kind of double dipping here and seeing if, hey, will you pay money to get me unlock it? Even though your data is gone, will you pay to have it unlocked? And so there's some other things that we can do to talk about protecting against that. Some of the schemes that we saw this year, which is really interesting, is the investment scams. So this is more pertaining to your customers. We're seeing a lot around crypto and investments. That being said, the crypto scams generally tend to have up until now led into a younger generation who are falling prey to that. We are seeing that change a little bit as the comfort level to our middle to older generations have the finances to invest and are starting to dabble a little bit. We see that because of FBI complaints that are coming in. And I don't know if it's up to you guys, but the average age for this, and again, this is where they're targeting, is generally an older generation who have access to a little bit more free cash. When we talk about the age of people, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie, was it The Beekeeper? I'm not here to recommend a movie or say it's good or bad, but the very first 15 minutes is an actual example of an investment scheme and kind of how that works. If you're interested in kind of get the gravity of the situation, it really talks about these investment schemes, and it's become quite a bit of a problem. The FBI also receives about 2,400 a day complaints about these different attacks and claims of loss. And so the biggest thing to say here is that they're overwhelmed. If you're expecting some sort of law enforcement agency to protect you or hunt them down and find them, it's a long shot that they would be able to recover anything that is stolen in a short amount of time, if potentially ever. So what we're seeing is from a tax pro side, it's generally about 45% of the attacks are coming from nation states. So that means like your big countries are actively going after tax practitioners. And so it's not these small basement hackers going after you. It's some pretty big players. So understanding who's attacking is also important from this point. Let's talk a little bit about cyber hygiene. And the best recommendation I can give you is absolutely question everything. Nothing is as it seems these days. Trust nothing, absolutely at all. Always be skeptical whenever you're dealing with email or communications. But what does zero trust truly mean? And it means you have to authenticate the person that's sending it. And if you're not expecting that communication, you can ask them to call, you can ask them to come into the office. Another way of authenticating documents, I talked about email. You get an email from a customer, and even if it's someone you know, you can have a process in place. Let's say I have an attachment, right? An Adobe attachment. I can set up a folder on my machine, and everyone knows that when you get an attachment, it gets saved to this folder, and it's called your scan folder. You don't open the attachment, it's downloaded there, and you scan it with your antivirus. You right click on it and you scan, use your antivirus and you scan it. That's at least a protection mechanism, and that's a policy that you can put in and say, every document we get gets scanned before it's ever opened. And so there's steps that you can do to always authenticate and then trust. And then the last one's kind of ugly, right, is assume a breach. It's hard to say. Working in a software company, I've placed many calls, talk to practitioners when I say, we think there's an issue, or I've heard CIA agents come knocking on your door and say, we think an issue's there. When a CIA agent comes knocking on your door, they're not thinking there's an issue. I just want to let you guys know that there's probably an issue. So being able to accept it, and it's important to be able to be open-minded if someone says there's an issue, to truly investigate, because it's better for there not to be an issue when you investigate it than to deny it and it continue on for years and years and years. And that could cause great financial ruin. So the quicker you can identify the issue, the better, and the less harm, obviously, to your customers. What are some good practices? Securing your email. One of the things I would say is separate your email from a business email and a personal. This is really hard for me. I've been around in the industry for over 21 years, and so many people have my email address. But if you can, separate the business email address that you have. People only send you tax information here versus the one that you go shopping with on Black Friday and you get all those ads. And I'm a sucker to click on one too and say, oh, I got a deal here or a coupon here, right? If you can separate them, don't allow your employees to log in and check their personal emails on their devices or on your work devices. That's something that you can do. Using strong passwords. Best thing I say here is use a password manager. There's a lot of them out there. 1Password, LastPass, doesn't particularly matter which one, but it's another layer. Nothing's a silver bullet, but it's another layer that you can put in. So you can have multiple passwords long, anything over 9 characters at a minimum. Generally phrases or the length of the password matters more than what's inside of it. So the longer the password's better. Using a manager to manage that helps make it actually doable on your side. The other thing I will talk about is multi-factor authentication, and we're going to get into this in just a second. But making sure that you turn on multi-factor authentication at a minimum, and I say minimum and you need more than that, is on your email. Making sure, because if your email, think about it, if your email gets breached, bad actors have access to everything. So if they go to reset passwords, they want to look at things, and they have access to your email, you've lost it. The other thing about email that I'll talk about is, and I'm guilty of this too, taxpayers do send us documents. We still get information through the email. Using your email as a filing cabinet is not a good practice. When you get an email, and if there's a document and it passes, go ahead and download that document, put it in your local storage or your cloud storage or however you're storing your documents. Go ahead and pull that out. Put it in there and then delete the email permanently. That way, in the event of a breach, that information is not compromised. The other part of that is what people don't realize is if there's a statute of limitations right on the filing, if you have that document, they can actually audit you further back if you have those records, right? And so making sure that you really do follow the statute of limitations and don't keep things longer in your email than you absolutely have to. And ultimately, don't keep anything in your email at all. So again, don't use email as a filing cabinet. It's a good best practice for you guys. The other thing I want to move on to real quick is training employees and your offline backups. Backing up. What I always tell people is you want to make sure you have a local backup. You want to make sure you have an offline backup, because just because you have a local backup and if your system gets compromised, the bad guys will find that backup and they'll lock you out of that one too. So you back it up to like it could be a USB drive, a removable hard drive. Do that weekly, daily, whatever you like. Generally in tax season, I would say at the end of the day, right? You want to because you're making that many changes, but back it up, put it on that hard drive, and then take it with you. Keep it in a cold storage, which just basically means not plugged in. Keep it in a fire safe, keep it at home. But having 2 to 3 backups is really a good idea in different places. In the event something does happen, you're not down. You haven't lost everything from like a ransomware attack, which is really, really good. And then, making sure your data is correct, checking and tracking your EFIN, PTINs, POAs. The IRS has your online account. You can go on to e-services and you can look at your record for filing. So if you have filed 10 returns, but you go online to your IRS e-services and it says you filed 100, well, there's a problem. Someone is using your EFIN. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's a breach of your system per se, right? That's not 100% there's a breach, but that's a clue that we need to start looking and doing an investigation on what's going on. And then, like I said, secure and monitoring your wireless networks is also something that we want to do, making sure you segment your work from your personal accounts, which is important. Now, this last one I want to talk about best practices is one, it hits me real hard because, I love my devices. We need to think about what's connected, right, to our network. Some of us work from home and some of us have TVs, smart TVs, so we can stream. Some of us I have a coffee maker that has Bluetooth capability. You can, make a cup of coffee if it's ready and press a button. The other day, actually, I was going home to my wife and we have an Alexa, right? She loves her Alexa and we go in and I walk in the door and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Babe, have a good day. And I'm whispering to her and she looks at me like I'm crazy. And most of the time I am. And she goes, why are you whispering to me? What's going on? I said, well, I don't want Alexa to hear what we're saying. And so she laughed, I laughed, Alexa laughed, we all laughed. But it's important, right? What's listening to the conversations? Where's that data being stored? And do I have access to delete those records? A good point about this is text messaging. Our customers come to us all the time and they'll text you something and they'll say, again, like, here's my driver's license, here's my birth certificate. And you didn't ask for it, but you just got that text message with that picture. And lo and behold, someone has your, Apple photos, or you have a Google photo backup, or you're backing up your images somewhere. And a copy of that document gets backed up to a personal account, it gets some storage area. And if that ever got breached, there you go. You have an involuntary disclosure. And so we have to be cognizant when we think about what's connected to our network. It could be a printer. I know of a practice that got breached a couple of years ago where their big copy printer wasn't working well. And so a partner went and ran and got this old printer they had in the desk drawer. They plugged it in, printed the tax return, everything was good. They left it plugged in and forgot about it. Lo and behold, that printer hadn't had a security update in many, many years. Bad actors found it, got in through the printer, compromised and stole their entire database of customers, were filing returns, and it went into a whole IRCI case. And so we have to be cognizant. What's connected? Are we updating? And do we have a plan to update? So account for everything that's connected. And do you have a plan to check and update all the devices that are connected? And where is that data being transferred? So that's what I want to just kind of infer to you guys here, or push to you guys, making sure you watch that. All right, we're going to go ahead and go to our polling question number 2.
Okay, everyone, this is our second polling question. What do you perceive to be the greatest risk in your own firm? And the options are technology, co-workers and or employees, weather, acts of God, or clients. And again, if you have any trouble answering online, sometimes certain devices don't let people answer these questions on their device. You can post your answer in the Ask a Question box and we'll record it there. And while we're waiting for some answers to come in, Jared, I wanted to back you up a few slides where you mentioned a particular company that stages phishing emails. Can you recall what that company was and repeat it for our audience?
I don't have the exact one that they use. They didn't necessarily give it to me, but what I would tell you to look at is like you would use like small business email penetration testing, and you can find some providers out there. So I couldn't necessarily give you the exact recommendation. There's a ton of them out there.
Yeah, a bunch.
I would just say, I would just say do some research on which ones you feel comfortable with, and which are in your price point, and it's going to be varying price points, what they'll charge you for that. It's an interesting service. It may not be for everyone, depending upon your budget for security. Again, it's all risk based, right? Any of these decisions we talk about today are risk based. Is it doable for your office? Is it something that'll make you feel more comfortable? And what level of risk are you willing to accept with the level of training you provide or do within your office?
Okay, thanks. So it looks like our responses are in, and almost 2/3 of our audience said technology is what they perceive to be the greatest risk in their firm.
That's awesome. So technology is a great risk, but again, I would probably beg to say that the people that you have in your office not understanding the technology or not understanding the significance of what they're doing poses a greater risk. But you're right, technology can be a risk for sure. Let's talk about our obligations. I know I've seen a couple of questions starting to float in about a written information security plan and what do we have to do and how do we protect ourselves? Well, let's start there. So you do have some obligations to protect the taxpayer data that you collect. Just real quick, the high level, who is it? Well, back in 1999, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act put the FTC in charge of protecting and creating rules around protecting taxpayer data. And they asked the FTC to classify financial institutions and what that means. And lo and behold, the FTC came back and said, you, tax practitioners, are considered a financial institution, just as any big bank or loaning office or car dealership. And so you are classified as a financial institution according to the FTC. So therefore, the rules and requirements that the FTC imposes upon all financial institutions apply to you. So that's something that's really good to know. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're required to draft some security policies. You're required to have a written plan that states what you're doing to protect data, right? And so what that is called is a WISP. And the FTC was actually really nice in this. And they said, we understand that we have multi-billion-dollar organizations down to small mom and pop shops and they're not all the same. There's no one plan that would actually work for everybody. And so they gave a lot of flexibility here. It says, look, if you're just a small office, your size and scope of your plan will look drastically different than the big guys, right? And so know that, how can I ever achieve this? Well, that you can achieve this by simply even having a page, by documenting the three different areas that I talked about: the physical, technical, and administrative. If you document how you're protecting data in those three buckets, you're there, right? And that plan will grow and it will morph, and you'll want to track more information as it goes. But those are the same things, and know that every plan looks different. Every plan could be large or small. It's really up to you and how you want to run your business. Now, the FTC safeguards rule, it is flexible for your own business. One of the things that I will say here is that for those that handle 5,000 taxpayer records, and the way they define that is, let's say if I do payroll, right, for every taxpayer that I do their payroll for, that's a taxpayer record. Every tax return as of the primary social, that is a taxpayer record. So if I do more than 5,000, there's actually additional requirements that the FTC will impose upon me. And that's doing a risk assessment. That's having some additional scans and checks and reports out that you have to develop. But for the most part, the average tax office is going to stay within the under 5,000 limit. So what I'm going to talk about today is going to try and focus within those kind of confines. The other part outside of the WISP, and we'll get there in a second, is in June of last year, the FTC also mandated, in addition to having a written information security plan, you have multi-factor authentication turned on at your device level. So on your computer systems, you must now have multi-factor authentication turned on. You've probably seen this in your software companies, your tax software companies, for a couple of years now, where they said, turn it on, turn it on, turn it on. We saw that coming down the road from the FTC. And so just know that you need to make sure that you have that turned on to be in compliance. The other part of it is encryption. They did say now all documents at rest, which means when it's just saved to a computer, it's just sitting there, right? Or in transit. So that means like if you're sending an email or if you're using a secure portal, that document has to be encrypted. Now, what does encryption mean? To the easiest extent that I can explain it, using Adobe and putting a password on it. Most paid subscriptions to Adobe the paid subscriptions to Adobe, I guess I should say, have a 256-bit encryption whenever you put a password on it, which is enough for industry standard. So that's kind of the answer there. If you're going to use email and you're going to send a document, at a minimum, you gotta make sure you put that password on it. A lot of software companies, when you start saving tax returns, it'll say, do you want to put a password on it? That's where they're encrypting it as well. And then obviously at rest, making sure it's encrypted. There's a lot of definitions there. I won't spend too much time, but know that a written information security plan, multi-factor authentication, and encryption are your real big requirements here that you must comply with. Now, for safeguarding data, I'm going to give you a resource. Go to irs.gov and go to publication 4557. That is the very first place you should start when you want to start building out your security plan. The publication 4557 talks about all the different things you need to do, the cyber hygiene, the antiviruses, the firewalls. That talks all of that. That tells you everything you need to know about safeguarding data in that publication. At the very bottom of that publication, I've highlighted it here. What it does is a yearly checklist. So you can print that off at the bottom and you can say, yes, I've done that, right? No, I haven't done that, or it's not applicable, right, to my business. So again, every year it's a pre-template you can run through, and it's just that pre-season checklist that you've got things done, you've done the training, you've set up your security, you've updated your software, you've done all those things, right? So take advantage of it. It's a free resource, publication 4557. Now, in publication 4557, it references out your requirement to building what we're going to talk about next, and that's a WISP. So we're going to go to polling question 3 and jump right into the WISP right after that.
Okay, this is our third question. We want to know if you've been paying attention. Is a WISP required for your tax firm? And the answer options are yes and no. So pick the option that is most appropriate to what you think is the correct answer, and then click submit. And it looks like these answers are pouring in very quickly. And just about everybody has said yes. However, a few are saying no, and I'm guessing that those are people who actually don't have a tax firm. But yeah, what do you think about this? Just about everybody has said yes.
That's good. That's heartening to hear. I think a lot of the education campaigns that have been going on have really pushed practitioners to start building one. So that's great. All right, let's move on real quick then to creating this plan. And again, it's not just about creating, but it's creating and updating the plan. It's not static. The document moves as you move. Each year it can be different and it needs to be updated. Again, I'm just going to say, if you go to the IRS website, it's IRS publication 5708, 5708, irs.gov publication 5708. The IRS actually has created, in partnership with the Security Summit, a template for you to use. So you're not starting from scratch. You don't have to build it on your own and not knowing what needs to be in it and all the components. If you'll go out there and download that publication, the first 3 pages are going to be the what you need to know to develop your written information security plan. And then pages, I believe it's 5 through 12 are going to be the template. And then this little picture on your screen here that shows this simple sample template, that's it. That's the first page of it. You just simply type in and fill in your firm name and then go through it and fill in the information that's applicable to your firm. So there's one out there. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and you can develop it to your size and scope. Again, it does cover the 3 main topics here. The other part of it, of this WISP, again, this is the highlighting outline. So just above it, I believe this is page 4 of that publication, just before you get to the template, it lays out all the different areas that you need to document. I know some people that come and copy and paste this skeletal outline. They put it in a Word document, and then they start typing from there. That works too. There is no one prescriptive or perfect or right way to write your WISP, as long as you're making a concerted effort, again, to document how you're protecting this information. That's really what's important for you to do. So again, those are all the different areas. I won't cover it over too much. I do want to jump into the next part. So the WISP is more or less what you're doing to protect the information, right? And then we really want to talk about, well, I'm going to go to polling question 4 here in just a second. What we want to talk about next is the how, and that comes down to policies. And we're going to dig into the actual how as well of your WISP. So I'm going to go to question 4 real quick before we go to the how.
Okay, this is our 4th and final polling question. And before I ask it, let me just remind you real quickly, a lot of people have been posting questions about why they can't download the slides. So the slides for this session are not available for download, but just as a reminder, the session itself will be available to review on CPA Practice Advisor's website at cpapracticeadvisor.com/webinars later today or tomorrow. So you can see it again there and take screenshots of any slides that you wanted to remember. This last polling question is, do you have a WISP for your firm? And your possible answers are yes, I'm working on it, or what's a WISP? So go ahead and click the answer that you feel is most appropriate and click submit. Okay, and while those are coming in, which is a majority, is a little more than half say yes, and almost all the rest are working on it.
Excellent, excellent. So this should help you as well. So the WISP we talk about is documenting, right? The physical protections, the technical protections, and the education, right? The things that we're doing to protect it. Now, you can supplement a WISP. Now, this is not the WISP. This is a supplement to it. And the WISP won't have to change as much when you use policies to supplement it. So things like my network policy. In my network policy, I'm going to say, that I've segmented things, that I only allow employees to get onto my network. My password policy is going to say I make sure everyone uses a password manager and it's longer than 9. Remote work policy, I don't allow my employees to have their own devices connected to my network. I provide them a laptop and a connection in. Policies talk about the how you're protecting the data. And so you can use these as your change documents, and you can continue to draft and update those, which will help you from having to continually go back and address the WISP. So there are, in the publication 5708, at the very, very bottom, there is a bunch of different policies that can help you catalog things, like a device policy. So you can put in, I have these devices and they're owned by me. Again, all these different things you can add and supplement your list with, and those tools are already built out for you. They're already in the IRS publication 5708, and you don't have to pay for them. So that makes it really nice. Now, what if something happens, and we're going to kind of come into closing moments here. I'm going to try and answer some questions. What if something happens and I do have a breach? The best thing I can tell you is there's a couple of steps that I would tell you to fix this. The FTC has a dated breach response guide. If you'll go out to the FTC website, in their data breach response guide, they actually have some pre-formatted emails and communications that'll help you with communicating to your customers what happened. They do require you, the FTC has required that you give a notification, and is within 30 days notice that you have identified a breach. That allows you to go on their website and you can kind of give them that information. You submit an online notification and they will then be in contact with you. But there are a couple other steps. Here you go. That's the notification for you guys. And it has to be affecting 500 people or more. That's the new requirement for a data breach notification. That went into effect this year and currently stands to be in effect until 2026, which is the next time they will be reviewing this data breach notification. One of the things that people also tell me is the FTC the only person that I need to notify? Well, no, they aren't. And it's not the only penalty that could be imposed on you. So just because the FTC could enforce penalties, actually the IRS could slap you with an involuntary disclosure penalty as well. So do make sure that you do notify the IRS as well as the FTC when you have these issues. Signs of data theft, if your customers are saying their returns have already been accepted when you're trying to file them and you get a bunch of those, that's kind of a sign. If customers are getting letters, transcripts are coming to your customers and they didn't request them, these are all signs that you can go out and take a look at, start doing an investigation of, is there something wrong with my system or is there something else at play? Again, your EFIN number I talked about earlier, going out and checking the actual filing volume of it. If your networks are running slower, if your mouse starts moving and you didn't do it, things go black. If you're seeing network traffic, and I know that sounds like a big tech term right there, but you're actually able to check logs on your router that'll say someone was working and there was traffic on my network at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. Again, there's ways you can check that. But again, ultimately, if things are locking you out, things are running sluggish, those can be signs of a potential data breach. The order in which you contact the authorities in case you suspect a breach is this. One, you get your WISP plan out. It's better to have the WISP because if something happens, this is the plan that tells you the steps you're going to take. Second is contact the stakeholder liaison. The IRS stakeholder liaison is your friend. Their whole goal is to help facilitate the communications within the IRS and to help you get the issue resolved quickly and get you back up and running quickly. The next step is you do need to contact your local authority and FBI, let them know something's going on or something has occurred. Third is your insurance carrier. One thing I will tell you about insurance, make sure you do have cyber insurance. Sometimes it's a different rider. Could be a different policy, but they will all, if it's a cyber policy, they will require a written information security plan. So you need to have one anyway, even though it is required by law by the FTC that you have one. So it's best to get started there. And then experts, I would say reach out to your software companies. They also can help you do a little bit of digging, what's going on. And then obviously that FTC data breach response guide is just a toolkit for you that'll help you recover from any type of breach that has maybe occurred in your office. So with that, I know I flew through this last part real quick about what to do and your information security plan, but there's some really good questions that I've gotten in the chat. And I saw one I want to address here. It says, isn't a written information security plan itself a security risk? If the person has this plan, then they know how to hack the data. That's a really good question. Well, the answer is you want to have this plan and you're going to have to protect it just like anything else. You need to make sure that you do have that password protected and encrypted, and you are going to have to document it. So yes, you're putting information in here, but no more than someone getting into your system and taking all your taxpayer data. So make sure you keep that copy offline as well. And when it is stored on your device, make sure it's encrypted, password protected. So yeah, it's a requirement to have, but the bad guys would have to get into your system to get it. And if they're into your system already, then information about your system doesn't really help them all that much more once they're already in. So it's a great question. So is there a risk? Maybe. Depends if, it would probably be more of an insider threat, like if you had an employee or someone else getting in and trying to maliciously attack you. But I'm sure you can lock up documents you don't want employees seeing as well. So I would just say take care on that level is protecting it from the physical stealing of that documents. Let's see here. Gail, do we have any other questions that I'm missing? I saw a couple in here. You mentioned that we should scan our incoming documents before we open them. What is that tool that you use? That's another great question. So it's just your antivirus. I encourage you to go check this out. You can, if you have antivirus on your system, go to a file in My Documents or wherever you're at, and generally you can just right-click on that file. And in the list of options that are there, you can click Scan. Your antivirus will pop up in there and say, scan this file. And it'll be able to scan that document. And so what I say is build a process in place in your office where all of your employees know that any document that comes in, maybe it's a front office person that only handles emails, right, and downloads. They put it in this folder, they scan it before anything gets opened and pushed anywhere else. So it's kind of a clean and dirty file. And the good thing about that is you have one person that's always looking for bad files. In the event something bad happens, they open it up and all of a sudden, bam, something bad has just taken place. You can unplug. You'll identify it right there. And you can kind of contain the threat versus people not really pay attention or looking and something happens and you miss that point of infection. So that's kind of what I mean there. I want to talk about scanning.
All right. I'll let you browse or see if any other questions come in the next minute or two. But while you're doing that, I'm going to do a little bit of end of session housekeeping for our attendees. First of all, Jared, this was amazing. Thank you for all this incredible information. We really appreciate your time and the effort you put into this webinar. We hope all of you enjoyed this and got a lot out of it. We want to thank you all for attending today's webinar and thank Drake for making this event possible and for enabling us to offer free continuing education credit for each attendee. As a reminder, you'll receive a link in your email for CPE certification later today. For CE credit with the IRS, we will be filing that directly with the IRS this week. I'm going to wait a day or so just to make sure everything is in place, and then we'll get that sent over to the IRS. If you have any questions about CPE or CE credit, you can contact me directly at gperry, Gperry, at cpapracticeadvisor.com. Also, if there are others watching this event with you at the same computer who need CPE or CE credit, you can email me their names and email addresses. And if it's CE credit, send me their PTIN numbers. And again, that's gperry at cpapracticeadvisor.com. When we finish this event, there will be a post-event survey evaluation form on your screen. We hope you'll take a minute to fill that out for us so we can continue to improve our webinar series. Jared, any other questions you want to ask at the very end here?
Yeah. Oh, man, there's so many good questions. I could spend so much time here. One of them is, so we don't have to put our WISP on the website to prove we have it? The answer is no. You do not want to publish your WISP publicly. That is only for your records. It's your private plan. The only time you would ever have to furnish a WISP is if the FTC, your insurance company, or an IRS agent, generally CI would be, an auditor wouldn't need it, but an IRC agent would ask for it. So you use it for training, use it for other things, but you would keep that for yourself. Taxpayers do not have to see that. It's not for them. That's why I say use policies. If your customer wants to see something, then you can say, here's my policy, right? And the policy is what you could share with the taxpayer and say, this is how we protect you. It's not the actual internals of how it works, which is what your WISP is. And so keep that WISP to yourself, keep it private, keep it locked, unless asked by an enforcement officer, whether FTC, FBI, or IRS.
All right. I think we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you again, Jared, for coming and presenting all of this useful information to us. If you posted a question that didn't get answered, these questions are going to be forwarded to Jared with your email address so he can get back to you with the answers. And I want to thank you all so much for your time today. And our audio is going to end now.